I never thought a plastic orange fence would be the thing that finally broke the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. But looking back now, I should have seen it coming from the moment Brenda Patterson knocked on my door that freezing November morning. The wind was already howling across the plains of eastern Wyoming, rattling the windows of my house on the corner lot at the end of Elk Ridge Drive in Casper. I had just finished my second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang, and there she stood, bundled up in a designer parka that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "Keith Xavier," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I need to speak with you about a violation." I sighed and stepped back to let her in, though every fiber of my being wanted to close the door. Brenda had been the HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, she had made it her personal mission to cite every minor infraction she could find. My neighbor 2 doors down got fined for having his trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. The Johnsons across the street received a nastogram about their mailbox being the wrong shade of black. "What is it this time?" I asked, leading her into my living room. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of my property. There, along the western edge of my corner lot, was the snow fence I had installed the previous weekend. 4 feet tall, bright orange plastic mesh stretched between metal posts, running about 50 feet along the property line. "This is not approved," she said, her voice sharp. Section 12. Paragraph 4 of the HOA covenants clearly states that all fences must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before installation. Furthermore, this orange monstrosity is not on the list of approved fence types. I felt my jaw tighten. "Brenda, that's not a permanent fence. It's a snow fence. I put it up because the wind coming across the open field creates massive drifts right across my driveway. Last winter, I had to shovel 3 times a day just to get my truck out." "I don't care if it's temporary or permanent," she said, tapping her clipboard. "Rules are rules. The fence must come down or you'll be fined $250 per day until it's removed." "That's insane. It's just plastic mesh." "It doesn't block anyone's view, it doesn't hurt property values, and it actually serves a functional purpose." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. "The HOA has standards, Keith. If we let you put up whatever you want, then everyone will think they can do the same. Next thing you know, we'll have chain link and barbed wire all over the neighborhood. The fence comes down by Friday, or the fine starts Saturday morning." She turned on her heel and marched out before I could respond, leaving me standing in my living room with my blood pressure rising. I looked out the window at the snow fence, then at the empty field beyond it. The weather forecast was calling for a major storm system to move through in early December, and I knew from experience what that meant. Without that fence, I would spend half my winter digging out my driveway. But Brenda Patterson did not care about practical concerns. She cared about power and control, and she wielded the HOA bylaws like a weapon. I spent the next 2 days researching Wyoming property law and HOA regulations. I discovered that snow fences were specifically exempted from most permanent structure regulations because they served a legitimate purpose in winter weather management. I printed out the relevant statutes and sent a certified letter to the HOA board, explaining that my snow fence was a temporary seasonal structure installed for safety and property protection, and therefore did not require architectural approval. Brenda's response arrived on Thursday. The letter was terse and threatening. The HOA did not recognize my legal interpretation, and if the fence was not removed by midnight Friday, fines would begin accruing immediately. Additionally, the HOA reserved the right to enter my property and remove the fence themselves, with all costs billed to me plus a 30% administrative fee. I called my lawyer, a guy named Marcus Chen, who I had gone to college with and who now practiced property law in Casper. He read the HOA letter and whistled. "They're reaching," he said. Wyoming Statute 17-7-208 specifically addresses temporary seasonal structures on residential property. Snow fences fall under that category. They can't fine you for this. So what do I do? Send them a cease and desist. I'll draft it for you. Basically, we'll inform them that any attempt to fine you or remove your fence will result in legal action. That should back them off. Marcus sent the cease and desist letter that afternoon. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of someone shouting in my yard. I pulled on jeans and a jacket and ran outside to find Brenda Patterson standing next to my snow fence with two other HOA board members, Gary Morrison and Linda Pritchard. Gary was holding a pair of bolt cutters. "What the hell are you doing?" I yelled, running down my driveway. "Removing an unapproved structure," Brenda said coolly. As per Section 19 of the enforcement provisions, the HOA has the right to remedy violations at the owner's expense. You can't do that. I sent you a cease and desist from my attorney. Your attorney doesn't dictate HOA policy, she said, nodding to Gary. He moved toward the fence with the bolt cutters and I stepped in front of him. "Touch that fence and I'm calling the police," I said. "For what?" Brenda asked. "We have every legal right to be here." "No, you don't. This is my property and that fence is legal under Wyoming state law. If you cut it down, that's destruction of property and I will press charges." Gary hesitated, looking at Brenda. She glared at me, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she pulled out her phone. "Fine. I'm calling the police myself. We'll see what they have to say about your illegal fence." 20 minutes later, a Casper PD patrol car pulled up. Officer Dave Sullivan stepped out, looking like he would rather be anywhere else. I knew Dave from the local gym where we both worked out in the mornings. "What's going on here?" he asked, glancing between us. Brenda launched into a tirade about HOA violations and my refusal to comply with community standards. I waited for her to finish, then handed Dave a copy of the Wyoming statute and the cease and desist letter. He read them both, then looked at the snow fence. "Madam," he said to Brenda, "this appears to be a legal temporary structure. If there's a dispute about HOA rules versus state law, that's a civil matter. But if you cut down his fence, that would be criminal destruction of property and I'd have to arrest you." Brenda's face turned red. "This is outrageous. The HOA has rights." "You have the right to take him to civil court if you think he's violating HOA rules," Dave said. "But you don't have the right to destroy his property. I suggest you contact your HOA attorney and sort this out the legal way." He tipped his hat to me and drove off. Brenda stood there sputtering for a moment, then turned to me with pure venom in her eyes. "This isn't over," she said. "Not by a long shot." They left and I thought maybe I had won, but I underestimated Brenda's vindictiveness. 2 weeks later, I received a notice from the HOA that I was being fined $5,000 for willful and flagrant violation of community standards, and that a lien would be placed on my property if the fine was not paid within 30 days. Additionally, the notice stated that I was banned from using any HOA common areas, including the community parking lot, the mailbox cluster, and the small park at the center of the neighborhood. I forwarded everything to Marcus, who immediately filed a lawsuit against the HOA in district court, seeking an injunction against the fines and a declaration that my snow fence was legal. The hearing was scheduled for late January. Meanwhile, December arrived with a vengeance. The first major storm hit on the 5th, dumping 18 inches of snow across Casper and bringing winds that gusted up to 60 miles per hour. I watched from my window as the snow fence did exactly what it was supposed to do, creating a drift barrier that protected my driveway. On the other side of the fence, in the open field, snow piled up in massive drifts that reached 6 and 7 feet high. On my side, the snow was manageable, maybe 8 inches in the driveway itself. I cleared it in 20 minutes with my snowblower and went inside to warm up. The next morning, I heard from my neighbor, Tom Henderson, who lived 3 houses down. "Did you see the community parking lot?" he asked when I ran into him at the grocery store. "No, why? It's completely buried." The wind came straight across that field to the west and dumped all the snow right into the lot. There's drifts 8 feet high in some spots. Nobody can get to their cars. I drove over to look. The community parking lot was a large paved area about a quarter mile from my house, located right at the edge of the neighborhood, where it bordered the same open field that ran along my property. The HOA had built it 5 years ago as overflow parking for guests and for residents who had more cars than garage space. About 30 cars were usually parked there at any given time. Now, the entire lot was buried under massive snow drifts. I could barely see the tops of some vehicles. The wind had scoured the open field and deposited every bit of loose snow directly into the parking area, creating drifts that completely blocked access. I pulled out my phone and took pictures. The irony was not lost on me. The same wind pattern that would have buried my driveway without the snow fence had instead buried the HOA's parking lot. Tom stood next to me, shaking his head. "This happens every year, but this is the worst I've ever seen it." Last year, Brenda said they were going to install snow fencing around the lot before winter. Obviously, that never happened. Why didn't they? Budget, I think. Or maybe she just forgot. Either way, people are going to be pissed. Half the neighborhood uses that lot. Over the next few days, the complaints started rolling in. Residents who parked in the community lot could not access their vehicles. The HOA hired a snow removal company to clear it, but the drifts were so massive that it took 3 days and cost over $8,000. 2 cars were damaged by the heavy equipment in the process. Then another storm hit the following week. Same pattern, same results. The parking lot was buried again, even worse than before. This time, the drifts were so high that the snow removal company said they would need to bring in specialized equipment, and the cost would be close to $15,000. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that there was an emergency HOA board meeting. Several residents were demanding to know why snow fencing had not been installed around the parking lot, especially since it was such an obvious problem. According to Tom, who attended the meeting, Brenda tried to deflect blame onto the snow removal company, claiming they had not done their job properly the first time. But then someone pointed out that a simple snow fence, like the one I had installed on my property, would solve the problem for a fraction of the cost. Brenda reportedly turned pale and said that snow fences were not aesthetically appropriate for the community. Someone actually laughed at her, Tom told me. They said it was ridiculous to spend tens of thousands of dollars on snow removal instead of a few $100 on plastic fencing. Brenda got defensive and said that my fence was illegal and she wasn't about to admit she was wrong by installing the same thing at the parking lot. She actually said that, more or less. It was pretty clear this is personal for her. The third storm hit right before Christmas. This one brought 30 inches of snow and winds that sustained at 40 miles per hour for 12 straight hours. My snow fence held perfectly, and my driveway required minimal clearing. The community parking lot, however, became completely inaccessible. Drifts reached the height of the light poles. Several residents had to rent cars because their vehicles were trapped. The HOA received dozens of complaints and threats of lawsuits from angry homeowners. On December 28th, I received a hand-delivered letter from Brenda. It was not on HOA letterhead, just personal stationery. The message was short and bitter. "Keith, this is all your fault. If you had simply followed the rules and removed your fence, none of this would have happened. You have created a hostile environment in this community, and you will be held accountable." I showed it to Marcus, who added it to our legal file. "This helps us," he said. "It shows she's acting out of personal animosity rather than legitimate HOA business. Keep it safe." The court hearing for the injunction was scheduled for January 21st. In the meantime, the HOA continued to rack up snow removal bills. By early January, they had spent over $40,000 clearing the parking lot, and winter was only half over. At the regular HOA meeting in mid-January, a group of residents led by Tom formally proposed that the board install snow fencing around the community parking lot. The motion was brought to a vote. Brenda, Gary, and Linda all voted against it. The other two board members, Sarah Feldman and Robert Chang, voted in favor. The motion failed 3-2. The residents were furious. Tom told me that at least a dozen people stood up and demanded explanations. Brenda's response was that snow fencing was not in keeping with the community's aesthetic standards, and that proper snow removal was the appropriate solution. Someone asked her why it was okay to spend $50,000 on snow removal but not okay to spend $500 on fencing, Tom said. She actually said that sometimes you have to pay for quality. That's insane. It gets better. Another person pointed out that you have a snow fence and your property looks fine. Brenda said your fence was illegal and under litigation, so it wasn't a valid comparison. Then Sarah Feldman, one of the board members, said that actually she had researched it and your fence is completely legal under state law. Brenda practically shouted her down, said Sarah didn't know what she was talking about, and ended the meeting. 2 days later, Sarah Feldman resigned from the HOA board, citing hostile working conditions and disagreements about board governance. She sent a letter to all residents explaining her decision, and specifically mentioning that Brenda had repeatedly ignored state law and sound financial advice in order to pursue a personal vendetta against me. The letter caused a firestorm. Suddenly, half the neighborhood was talking about what was happening. People started taking sides. Some supported Brenda, saying that rules were rules and I should have followed proper procedures. But most people thought the whole situation was absurd, especially after seeing the snow removal bills and the ongoing problems with the parking lot. On January 14th, another major storm rolled through. By this point, the community parking lot was essentially unusable. Even when cleared, the drifts would reappear within hours because there was nothing to block the wind. The HOA stopped trying to keep it clear and just put up barriers, telling residents the lot was closed for the remainder of winter. This caused a new wave of complaints because many residents had no other place to park extra vehicles. Several people started parking on the street, which violated a different HOA rule. Brenda sent out violation notices, which only made people angrier. The court hearing finally arrived on January 21st. Marcus and I sat on one side of the courtroom while the HOA's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Moore, sat on the other. Brenda was there too, sitting ramrod straight in the gallery, glaring at me. Judge William Carver presided. He was in his 60s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and a reputation for cutting through procedural nonsense to get to the heart of matters. Patricia Moore argued that HOA covenants were legally binding contracts and that I had violated those covenants by installing a fence without approval. She claimed that allowing me to bypass the approval process would undermine the entire HOA structure and lead to chaos. Marcus countered by citing Wyoming Statute 17-7-208, which explicitly protected temporary seasonal structures like snow fences. He argued that state law superseded HOA covenants when there was a conflict, and that the HOA's attempts to fine me were legally invalid. Judge Carver listened to both sides, reviewed the documents, and then asked a question that cut right to the point. "Miss Moore, does the HOA parking lot have snow fencing?" Patricia hesitated. "No, Your Honor." "Why not?" "That's a decision for the HOA board to make regarding common areas." "But it's the same type of fence, correct? Same purpose, same temporary structure." "Yes, but the architectural review standards, Miss Moore. I've read the HOA covenants. The architectural review process applies to permanent structures and modifications that affect property appearance. A temporary snow fence is neither permanent nor, in my view, an aesthetic modification that reasonably falls under HOA purview. Moreover, Wyoming state law is clear on this matter. Temporary seasonal structures installed for safety and property protection are exempt from the kind of restrictions the HOA is trying to impose." He turned to Marcus. "You have photographs of the plaintiff's property with the snow fence installed." Marcus handed over a folder. The judge looked through the pictures, which clearly showed that the fence was simple, unobtrusive, and obviously functional. "And do you have photographs of what happens without the fence?" Marcus produced photos from the previous winter, showing my driveway buried under massive drifts. Judge Carver nodded, then looked at Patricia Moore. "Do you have photographs of the HOA parking lot?" "I'm not sure that's relevant, Your Honor. Humor me." Patricia reluctantly produced photos showing the buried parking lot. The judge studied them for a long moment, then set them aside. "Here's my ruling," he said. "The plaintiff's snow fence is a legal temporary seasonal structure under Wyoming law. The HOA's attempts to fine him or force removal are invalid and unenforceable. I'm issuing a permanent injunction against any such fines or enforcement actions. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to reimburse the plaintiff for all legal fees incurred in this matter." Brenda let out a small gasp from the gallery. Judge Carver glanced at her, then continued. "Furthermore, I'm troubled by what appears to be a pattern of arbitrary and capricious enforcement by this HOA. The evidence suggests that the board has spent tens of thousands of dollars on snow removal for a parking lot that faces the exact same conditions as the plaintiff's property, while simultaneously refusing to implement the same simple, cost-effective solution that the plaintiff employed. This strikes me as poor governance at best and possible mismanagement of HOA funds at worst." He looked directly at Brenda now. "Madam, are you the HOA president?" Brenda stood up stiffly. "Yes, Your Honor." "I strongly suggest you reconsider your priorities. HOA boards have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of all residents, not to pursue personal vendettas. If I see another case like this come through my courtroom, I will not be so lenient. You understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda said, her voice tight. The hearing ended, and Marcus and I walked out victorious. The HOA would have to pay his legal fees, which totaled about $4,000, and I was free to keep my snow fence up for as long as I wanted. I thought that would be the end of it. Once again, I was wrong. 2 days after the hearing, the HOA held another emergency board meeting. According to Tom, who attended, Brenda announced that in light of the court's decision, the board would be installing snow fencing around the community parking lot. Everyone cheered, Tom told me. Finally, some common sense. But then Brenda said that because of the unexpected legal fees and snow removal costs, the HOA was going to have to levy a special assessment to cover the expenses. $2,000 per household, due in 30 days. $2,000. That's insane. That's what everyone said. People went ballistic. Someone pointed out that if the board had just installed the snow fence back in November like they should have, none of these costs would have been incurred. Brenda blamed you, said that your lawsuit had forced the HOA to spend money on legal defense. We won. They're the ones who got fined for legal fees. I know, but Brenda's not exactly operating in the realm of logic at this point. Anyway, Robert Chang, the other sane board member, made a motion to table the special assessment until they could review the budget and find other ways to cover the costs. Gary and Linda voted against it, but Robert's motion passed because Sarah's resignation meant there were only 4 board members, so it was 2-2. Brenda had to break the tie, and she voted against the assessment, but she looked like she was going to explode. Over the next week, I started hearing from neighbors who stopped by to thank me for fighting the HOA. Several people mentioned that they were organizing a petition to recall Brenda and the other board members who had supported her. Wyoming HOA law allowed for board recalls if 20% of homeowners signed a petition. The petition organizers collected signatures quickly. Within 10 days, they had the required number. A recall election was scheduled for February 15th, but Brenda was not going down without a fight. She sent out a letter to all residents, claiming that the recall effort was being organized by a small group of malcontents who wanted to undermine community standards. She specifically named me as the ringleader, even though I had nothing to do with organizing the petition. The letter backfired spectacularly. People were already angry about the snow removal costs and the attempted special assessment. Brenda's letter just reminded everyone why they were mad in the first place. On February 10th, 5 days before the recall election, I came home from work to find my snow fence cut down. Every single post had been sawed through at the base, and the orange mesh was lying in shreds across my yard. I immediately called the police. Officer Sullivan responded again, along with another officer I didn't know. They took photos and a statement. The damage was estimated at about $300 for the materials, plus my time to reinstall it. Any idea who did this? Sullivan asked. I have my suspicions, but no proof. Well, we'll write it up as vandalism. If you have any security camera footage, that would help. I didn't have cameras, which I immediately regretted, but my neighbor across the street, Bill Henderson, stopped by later that evening. I saw who did it, he said. I was working from home this afternoon, and I saw Gary Morrison from the HOA board pull up around 2 o'clock. He got out with a handsaw and cut down your fence. Took him about 20 minutes. I got video on my phone. I called Sullivan back, and he came to take Bill's statement and collect the video evidence. The footage clearly showed Gary cutting down my fence in broad daylight. That's criminal mischief, Sullivan said. We'll go talk to him. The next morning, Gary Morrison was arrested and charged with criminal mischief. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Brenda issued a statement saying that Gary had acted on his own and that the HOA board did not condone his actions, but nobody believed her. The recall election on February 15th was a landslide. Brenda, Gary, and Linda were all removed from the board by margins of over 70%. 3 new board members were elected, including Tom Henderson. The new board's first action was to issue a formal apology to me. and to announce that snow fencing would be installed around the community parking lot before the next winter season. Gary Morrison eventually pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and was ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my fence, plus a $500 fine. Brenda tried to stay involved in HOA politics, but her credibility was destroyed. She and her husband moved out of Meadowbrook Hills that summer. The new HOA board also commissioned an independent audit of the association's finances. The auditor discovered that Brenda had been charging personal expenses to the HOA, including gas and meals, claiming they were related to HOA business. The total amount was about $3,000 over 2 years. The board considered pressing charges but ultimately decided to just demand repayment, which Brenda's husband provided. As for me, I installed a new snow fence in November, this time with security cameras covering it. The fence did its job perfectly throughout the winter, and I never had any more trouble with the HOA. The community parking lot also got its snow fence. The new board installed it in October, spending less than $600 on materials. That winter, the lot remained clear and accessible with minimal snow removal costs. The HOA saved tens of thousands of dollars compared to the previous year. Looking back on the whole ordeal, I'm still amazed at how much trouble a simple orange plastic fence caused. But it was never really about the fence. It was about Brenda's need for control and her inability to admit when she was wrong. She would rather have spent thousands of HOA dollars and damaged her own reputation than acknowledge that I had a valid point. The irony is that if she had just left my fence alone, none of this would have happened. The parking lot would still have gotten buried in snow, but it wouldn't have become a symbol of her poor judgment. She could have quietly installed snow fencing around the lot without anyone connecting it to my situation. Instead, her vendetta against me turned a minor issue into a major crisis that cost her everything. I learned some lessons too. I learned that standing up to unreasonable authority is important, even when it's difficult. I learned that most people are reasonable and will support you if you're in the right. And I learned that documentation is everything. Without the legal research, the attorney letters, and eventually Bill's video evidence, things could have gone very differently. The new HOA board turned out to be competent and reasonable. They focused on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. They updated the covenants to explicitly allow temporary seasonal structures like snow fences. They also implemented better financial oversight to prevent the kind of wasteful spending that had occurred under Brenda's leadership. Tom Henderson, as one of the new board members, told me that one of their first discussions was about what had gone wrong under the previous board. We realized that the HOA had lost sight of its purpose, he said. We're supposed to maintain property values and provide services that benefit everyone. Instead, the board had become this authoritarian body that existed mainly to tell people what they couldn't do. We're trying to change that culture. They succeeded. Meadowbrook Hills became a more pleasant place to live once the focus shifted from enforcement to service. The board started organizing community events, improved the landscaping in common areas, and actually listened to resident concerns. As for Brenda, I heard she and her husband bought a house in a neighborhood without an HOA. I suspect she learned her lesson about the limits of petty authority, though I'll never know for sure. We didn't stay in touch. Gary Morrison's criminal case ended up being more significant than anyone expected. Because he was arrested and charged, he lost his job in banking, which required a clean criminal record. His guilty plea meant he had a misdemeanor conviction on his record. I felt a little bad about that, even though he had brought it on himself. Cutting down someone's fence in broad daylight was a stupid thing to do, especially for someone who should have known better. The whole experience made me think a lot about HOAs and how they function. In theory, they're a good idea. They maintain common areas, enforce basic standards that protect property values, and provide a structure for community decision-making. But in practice, they can become vehicles for petty tyranny if the wrong people get into power. Brenda Patterson was the wrong person. She viewed the HOA presidency not as a service position, but as a source of authority. She enforced rules not to benefit the community but to demonstrate her power. And when challenged, she escalated rather than reconsidered. The financial cost to the HOA was staggering. Beyond the $40,000+ spent on snow removal, there were the legal fees from our court case, the cost of the special audit, and the general administrative overhead from dealing with the crisis. The new board estimated that Brenda's mismanagement had cost the association somewhere around $60,000 over the course of that winter. For a small HOA with only 120 homes, that was a significant amount. It meant the association had to delay other planned improvements, including repaving some of the community roads and updating the playground equipment in the park. But the human cost was significant too. The stress and conflict affected the entire neighborhood. People were angry, divided, and distrustful. It took months for the new board to rebuild community trust and restore a sense of normalcy. I personally dealt with anxiety and stress throughout the ordeal. Every time I saw an HOA letter in my mailbox, my heart rate would spike. I spent countless hours researching laws, communicating with my attorney, and preparing for court. Even after we won, I was looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack. The vandalism of my fence was particularly upsetting. Knowing that someone had come onto my property and deliberately destroyed something I had built felt like a violation. Installing security cameras helped me feel safer, but it was frustrating that I had to take those measures in the first place. Bill Henderson, the neighbor who provided the video evidence, told me he had seen the whole thing unfold from his home office window. "I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing," he said. "Gary just pulled up like it was no big deal, got out with a saw and started cutting. He didn't even look around to see if anyone was watching. It was like he thought he had every right to do it. Did he say anything? Did you talk to him?" "No, I just started recording. I figured if I confronted him, he might stop and then we wouldn't have evidence. Better to document it and call you afterwards." Bill's decision to record rather than intervene was smart. Without that video, it would have been Gary's word against suspicion, and proving who vandalized the fence would have been nearly impossible. The police investigation that followed the video evidence was straightforward. Sullivan and his partner went to Gary's house that same evening. According to Sullivan, who told me about it later, Gary initially tried to deny it, but when confronted with the video, he admitted what he had done. He said Brenda had been complaining about your fence for months, and that he thought he was helping the HOA by getting rid of it, Sullivan told me. I asked him if Brenda had specifically told him to cut it down, and he said no, it was his own decision. But I got the feeling there was more to it than that. You think Brenda put him up to it, can't prove it either way. Gary said he acted alone, and we have to take that at face value unless evidence shows otherwise. But between you and me, the timing is pretty suspicious. The recall election was 5 days away, and Brenda was desperate. I wondered about that too. Had Brenda explicitly told Gary to vandalize my fence, or had she just complained about it so much that Gary thought he was doing her a favor? Either way, the result was the same. Gary faced criminal charges, and Brenda's already damaged reputation took another hit. The recall election itself was surprisingly well organized. The group that had collected petition signatures formed an election committee, following all the procedures outlined in Wyoming HOA law and the Meadowbrook Hills bylaws. They arranged for ballot distribution, set up a polling location at the community center, and recruited volunteers to oversee the voting process. I voted early in the morning before work. The ballot listed the 3 board members subject to recall and 3 candidates running to replace them. The process was simple. Vote yes or no on each recall, then vote for your preferred candidates. The results were decisive. Brenda was recalled by a vote of 82 to 14. Gary and Linda also lost by similar margins. The 3 new candidates, including Tom Henderson, won easily. At the meeting where the results were announced, Brenda gave a brief speech. She stood at the podium, her face tight with suppressed emotion, and said that she had served the community to the best of her ability and that she was disappointed by the lack of appreciation for her efforts. "I worked hard to maintain standards and protect property values," she said. "But it's clear that this community doesn't value those things anymore. I wish you all luck with your new board." She sat down to silence. Nobody clapped. A few people exchanged glances, but most just looked uncomfortable. It was an awkward, sad ending to what had been a toxic tenure. The new board members were sworn in immediately after the election results were certified. Their first meeting was the following week, and I attended to show my support. Tom Henderson was elected board president by his fellow members. In his opening remarks, he set a different tone than Brenda had. "We're here to serve the community, not to rule it," he said. "Our job is to maintain common areas, enforce reasonable rules that protect everyone's property values, and foster a sense of community. We're not here to micromanage people's lives or pursue personal agendas. If we do our jobs right, most of you will barely notice we exist, and that's exactly how it should be." The meeting covered practical matters: approving the snow fence installation around the parking lot, reviewing the budget, and discussing upcoming maintenance projects. There was no drama, no grandstanding, just competent people handling community business efficiently. One agenda item caught my attention. The board voted to revise the architectural review process to explicitly exempt temporary seasonal structures, including snow fences, holiday decorations, and similar items. The revision passed unanimously. "This should have been done years ago," Tom said. "There's no reason to make people jump through hoops for temporary things that serve a practical purpose and don't hurt anyone." After the meeting, several people came up to thank me again for standing up to the old board. One woman, Patricia Young, who lived on the other side of the neighborhood, told me she had been cited by Brenda for having a small vegetable garden in her front yard. She said it violated the landscaping standards, Patricia said. "I had to tear it out and pay a $200 fine. I was so angry, but I didn't know how to fight it. Watching you take them to court inspired me. Next spring, I'm replanting that garden, and if anyone has a problem with it, they can deal with the new board." Stories like Patricia's made me realize how many people had been affected by Brenda's overzealous enforcement. The snow fence had been my issue, but it was really just one example of a much larger problem. The winter ended, and spring arrived in Wyoming the way it always does, gradually and with occasional setbacks. I took down my snow fence in late March when the snow finally stopped falling. I cleaned the posts and rolled up the mesh, storing everything in my garage for the next winter. The community parking lot snow fence came down at the same time. The difference was stark. The lot had remained accessible all winter, with minimal snow removal costs. The HOA's budget for snow removal had been 98% lower than the previous year. At the annual HOA meeting in May, the new board presented a financial report that showed the dramatic cost savings. They also announced that because of these savings, the regular annual dues would not increase, and in fact, there would be a small surplus that would go toward the road repaving project. The contrast with the previous year could not have been more obvious. Under Brenda's leadership, the HOA had hemorrhaged money on unnecessary snow removal and legal fights. Under the new board, the association was running efficiently and saving money. The meeting also included updates on other initiatives. The new board had organized a spring cleanup day, started a neighborhood email list for better communication, and planned a summer barbecue in the community park. These were simple things, but they helped rebuild the sense of community that had been damaged during the previous year's conflicts. I stood up during the open comment period and thanked the new board for their work. "Last year was difficult for a lot of us," I said, "but I think we've come through it stronger. The new board has shown that an HOA can be a positive force in the community rather than a source of conflict. I appreciate everything you've done to turn things around." There was applause, and several other people spoke up to echo my comments. Afterwards, Tom pulled me aside. "You know, none of this would have happened if you hadn't stood your ground," he said. "Most people would have just taken down the fence and grumbled about it. By fighting back, you exposed the problems with the old board and created an opportunity for change." "I didn't do it to be a hero," I said. "I just wanted to keep my driveway clear." "I know, but that's what makes it meaningful. You weren't looking for a fight. You just stood up for what was right when you were pushed. That's what we all should do." Summer in Meadowbrook Hills was pleasant that year. The community barbecue in July brought out over 60 families. Kids played in the park while adults ate burgers and chatted. It felt like what a neighborhood should be, people living near each other and getting along. I met a woman named Wendy Zimmerman at the barbecue. She had moved into the neighborhood in March after the recall election, so she had missed all the drama. "People keep telling me I'm lucky I wasn't here last year," she said. "What happened?" I gave her the abbreviated version of the story. She laughed when I got to the part about Brenda refusing to install snow fencing at the parking lot while simultaneously trying to force me to remove mine. "That's ridiculous," she said. "Some people just can't admit when they're wrong." That was definitely Brenda's problem. Wendy and I started dating not long after that. It turned out we had a lot in common, including a shared disdain for petty bureaucracy. She was an engineer for an oil company, practical and straightforward, with no patience for nonsense. When I showed her the snow fence in my garage that fall, she laughed. "This caused all that trouble, it's just orange mesh." Yep, that's all it took. People are weird. I reinstalled the fence in November. This time there were no HOA complaints, no threatening letters, no drama. It went up without incident, and when the first snowstorm hit in early December, it did its job perfectly. The community parking lot fence went up at the same time. The board had purchased slightly heavier-duty materials after the success of the previous year, and they even installed it earlier to be better prepared. That winter was relatively mild compared to the previous one, but the fences still made a significant difference. My driveway stayed clear, the parking lot remained accessible, and the HOA's snow removal costs continued to be minimal. At the annual meeting in May of the following year, the board announced that the association had built up enough of a surplus to move forward with the road repaving and playground upgrade projects. Both were completed by midsummer, and the neighborhood looked better than it had in years. I ran into Gary Morrison once, about a year after his arrest. I was at the grocery store and he was in line ahead of me at the checkout. He saw me and looked uncomfortable, but I nodded hello. After he paid, he waited for me outside. "Hey, Keith, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure." "I wanted to apologize for what I did. Cutting down your fence was stupid and wrong. I let Brenda get into my head and I made a bad decision. I'm sorry." "I appreciate that, Gary. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about how things turned out for you. I know you lost your job." "Yeah, that was rough. But honestly, it was a wake-up call. I was letting other people dictate my actions instead of thinking for myself. The new job I have now pays less, but I'm happier. And I'm not involved in any HOAs anymore. Probably a smart choice." We shook hands and that was it. I don't know if Gary's apology was sincere or if he just wanted to clear his conscience, but either way, I appreciated the gesture. Brenda, on the other hand, I never heard from again. According to neighborhood gossip, she and her husband had moved to Cheyenne and were living in a house with no HOA. I hoped she was happier there, though I suspected she probably found something else to be controlling about. Wendy and I got married the following year. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, including Tom and his wife. We bought a bigger house in a different part of Casper, one without an HOA. I'd had enough of community associations to last a lifetime, but I still drive through Meadowbrook Hills occasionally, usually when I'm visiting Tom. The neighborhood looks good. The roads are smooth, the park is well maintained, and people seem content. The HOA operates efficiently and without drama, exactly as it should. And every winter, I see the orange snow fences go up along the community parking lot and along various properties where homeowners have chosen to install them. Nobody complains anymore. Nobody gets fined. The fences do their job, the snow gets managed, and life goes on. It's amazing how much trouble could have been avoided if Brenda had just left well enough alone. One simple plastic fence, installed for a practical purpose, became a symbol of everything wrong with petty authority and poor governance. And when it finally came down to it, the community chose common sense over arbitrary rules. Looking back, I'm glad I fought. Not because I won, though that was satisfying, but because it reminded me that standing up to unreasonable authority matters. If everyone just goes along to avoid conflict, then the Brendas of the world get to keep exercising their petty tyranny unchecked. Sometimes, you have to draw a line in the snow and defend it, even if it's just about an orange plastic fence.